After starting out 5-0, the Louisville Cardinals are finally in the AP Top 25 rankings. We'll talk about the Cardinals coming into the week at number 25 and more on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets back, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. As I mentioned in the opener, the Cards are back in the top 25. Well, for the first time this season, I should say, but they're back in the top 25. After a 5-0 start, Louisville now checks in at number 25 ahead of the matchup against Notre Dame on Saturday. We will talk about that. We'll also sort of go back to that Friday night victory over NC State. We'll talk about the offense a little bit, and we'll tell you about why you shouldn't worry about the offense moving forward. And then we will dive into a weekly mailbag segment to kick off the week. So, obviously, the big news on Sunday with the new AP poll coming out, many Louisville fans were questioning whether or not the Cardinals were going to find their name in that ranking. I personally felt like with whatever margin of victory on Friday evening that Louisville would be in the top 25, but admittedly with as rough of a win as it was, I sort of questioned it. However, I looked at how many teams lost in the bottom half of the rankings, and I realized that the Cardinals had a very solid chance. And they end up at number 25, Kentucky at number 24 as well. So both of the top Bluegrass state teams are in the rankings for the first time this season. A couple of firsts this season, obviously getting to 5-0, which is the first time since 2013. So it's been close to a decade. First time since the program has been in the Atlantic Coast Conference. But Jeff Brohm has the team in a good spot in his first year at the helm of the University of Louisville football program. So I went back and I rewatched the game against NC State. I went back and focused specifically on the offense and rewatched it again, just focusing specifically on the defense. I had a good amount of time at my disposal, so I spent my time really studying the film, going back and seeing where Louisville messed up, seeing where NC State was to blame for things, because I think it was a mixture between the two, right? I think that there were some instances to where you tip your hat to NC State, Tony Gibson, the defensive coordinator for the Wolfpack, and say, congratulations, good job. But there were also some instances to where Louisville had some self-inflicted wounds to where they held themselves back. Some key penalties, receivers dropping passes, passes not being on the mark, whatever may have you, Louisville not being able to run the ball well. There's a culmination of different things that we're going to dive more into in the second segment of the show. But after watching this game, I feel like my mind was consistently going back to games in the past to where I remember Louisville losing these types of games. So after rewatching this game multiple times, I came to the conclusion, the number one conclusion was that it cannot be said enough how resilient that this Cardinals team is under pressure with the game on the line and when adversity strikes the hardest. That is a very encouraging trait to have, and I think that you can criticize however much you want, and we have been critical on this show, as I've told you we will be, regardless if you win or lose, because there's always ways you can get better. But we're also going to praise when, the time is right. Obviously, when good things happen, we're going to talk about those good things. I can't stand when there's this or that type mentality to where, if you're criticizing, that means that nothing can ever be good enough, or when you are praising and giving credit, oh, you just turned a blind eye to everything that goes wrong. I mean, I see it under the YouTube comments. I see it on social media, not just pertaining to this show particularly, but just society in general, to where everything has to be one thing or another. Things aren't mutually exclusive all the time. So I think that for this show, we're going to look at things realistically. We're going to criticize when the time is right. We're going to give credit when the time is right. But when it comes to this team being 5-0, we can all agree that the way Louisville got there, pretty stressful. The cardiac cards, as we have always been known as since I've been alive 25 years, it's been that sort of season for Louisville. But what I will say is that the silver lining to all this is that the Cardinals are 5-0. No matter how critical you are, the Cardinals have not lost a game yet. You can play the devil's advocate and say, well, you have been favored to win every game, and it's not like you're a top 5, 10 ranked team to where even though you're favored, you're playing good teams. I don't think it's a cupcake schedule. I think we get this we perceive the schedule as 100% filled with cupcakes because we talked all offseason about how it's one of the easiest schedule on paper for a Power 5 team. But when you look at the schedule, I think that other Power 5 teams have played easier schedules than Louisville. Outside of Murray State, the Cardinals have played 4 Power 5 teams. Now, granted, not great Power 5 teams, but nonetheless, Power 5 teams. They've beaten 3 conference teams. Louisville is 3-0 in the conference. They also beat Indiana. So, I mean, like I said, you can get really critical with the schedule and say, well, Louisville's 5-0 because they haven't played anybody. Well, they're handling business like they're supposed to do. What more do you want them to do than run the table at the moment and not lose a game? There is a case to be had. There's a discussion that we could dive into about how they're getting to 5-0. But at the end of the day, critical or not critical, the team is undefeated leading up to week 6. The Cardinals could be bowl eligible by the first weekend in October. That hasn't happened in a decade. So when you're being critical, just remember that it's almost like you're studying things under a microscope. But like I said, things aren't mutually exclusive. We can acknowledge that there is still room for improvement on both sides of the football. Have we seen moments of absolute brilliance from both sides of the football? Yes, we have. But have we seen instances to where we can acknowledge, okay, we still need to work on that? Well, of course. If there's nothing to work on, then that kind of scares me. But the team is doing it in a way that is resilient. One thing that I found interesting, but I liked a ton, was after the game, the post-game interviews with some of the players and the coaches. I think it was Brohm that mentioned that there were multiple players in the locker room that were essentially saying, and obviously I'm not quoting this word for word, we're paraphrasing here, but there were multiple players that were like, yeah, we got this. We're going to come back and win. Having that mentality, I think, is reflective of the state of the program that we are now in. I think Jeff Brohm, not only does he make sense for Louisville from a background standpoint, being from the city, electric offensive scheme, and being able to overachieve at Purdue, but the mentality that he brings to this program, the mindset, the swagger, if you will, that, we're the University of Louisville and we're not going to just lay over and lose easily. You're going to have to give us your best game for us to lose a game. And for them to not have had a good first half, but still be at halftime saying, we're going to come out and win this game. That's something that I look at, and I think that that is an indication of where the culture is at for this program, and it's something that's encouraging moving forward. So Louisville's back in the top 25 because of the resiliency of this team. It hasn't always been pretty. There's room for improvement on both sides of the football, but the team is a perfect 5-0. And now you look ahead to week 6, a matchup with a ranked Notre Dame team, a top 10 team comes to L&N Cardinals Stadium. We're going to preview that matchup entirely. But before we do that, I do want to take a step back and go back to that NC State game. We talked about the offense a little bit on Friday evening. I wanted to discuss the offense again. It wasn't a pretty performance, but I'm not really worried about this offense moving forward. And we're going to tell you why here in just a moment after we talk about our friends. Oh, that is not the right one. Look at me looking to try to get to talking about sports betting a little earlier than expected. Before we do that, I want to talk to you about our friends over at Athletic Brewing Company. At this point in time, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. Their brews are great tasting, award-winning, and beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. The versatility is crazy. They brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beers, including IPAs, Goldens, Sours, and more. My favorite, especially this time of the year, is the Oktoberfest flavor. It is absolutely fantastic. Tastes just like a beer, but obviously there are no hangovers ever. They are fit for all times. You're watching a big game, you're at your kid's game, tackling work, working out, whatever it may be. It is an extremely versatile beverage. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use the code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. College football season is almost halfway done, but Locked On is continuing to kick up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, the conference rivalry games, while also going in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to stay tuned. But we're continuing on along discussing that 13-10 victory for the Louisville Cardinals over the NC State Wolfpack on Friday evening down in Raleigh. Cardinals now 5-0, number 25 in the AP polls, first time in the poll this season. I wanted to discuss the game a little bit more before we got into the preview of Notre Dame later on this week. One specific talking point in the instant reaction episode was the rough offensive performance. And admittedly, in the comments on YouTube, there have been some people that have said that I was too critical of Jack Plummer, that I didn't take into account how the NC State pass rush was essentially getting to Plummer most of the game. I didn't take into account that the team was one-dimensional, which I did. But I don't feel as though I was overly critical of Plummer, to be completely honest. I did say that he had to be better and that he made some mistakes in the game. But I also made it a point to emphasize that this is not like Louisville did not have a rough offensive outing simply and solely because of Jack Plummer. Everyone was to blame for the offensive performance on Friday evening. I even went as far to say that, the offensive line didn't hold up at times. Receivers dropped passes, especially in the first half. The rushing game made things one-dimensional when the ground game was essentially non-existent. I said that all these things came into play and that this wasn't an issue on Jack Plummer. I even went as far as suggesting that he had some really solid moments in this game. I thought he made some pretty great passes under pressure. And like I said, I felt I was pretty fair. If you took me to be overly critical, perhaps I was, but I don't necessarily think so. But one thing as well is that we have been extremely honest on this show about where Louisville's offense has been. And it has been in a very, very good spot. Just a week ago, we were giving a ton of credit to Jack Plummer with his performance against Boston College. One of the best performances, if not the best performance from a quarterback in that week in college football. Another thing that I have said and will say on this show to make it a point of emphasis, even though this team had a tough offensive performance, I'm not worried about the offense moving forward. Personally, I've heard from multiple people on social media, those that have either coached Plummer or have helped train Plummer or know Plummer personally that have said that he continues to play better throughout the duration of the season. We saw that last year at California. I agree. I think that when the lights shined the brightest, Plummer had some fantastic games last year against USC, against some other teams in the conference. I think it's going to be the same case for Louisville this year. I look for him to continue to play better and better as the season goes along. Is there room for improvement? Yeah, there's room for improvement all over the team, and that's okay. We are in week 6 of the season, and the team is 5-0. There's a respective context that we're talking about here. I think that at this point in time, it is not necessarily, bad to have areas of improvement unless they are costing you football games. They are not costing you football games. I think Plummer, you're seeing him get better and better throwing the deep pass. I think it has been extremely encouraging with what he's been able to do with his legs. There's just been some mental mistakes here and there. Not every quarterback is going to be perfect. On Friday evening, he had some passes that were very critical turnovers, especially the first and goal, throwing it over the middle. Brohm took responsibility for that, saying that, they didn't necessarily switch up the scheme the way they wanted to. There were some talk whether or not Louisville switched up the silent count that NC State was banking on and eventually getting to the quarterback easily. This isn't a segment or even a point of emphasis to bash Jack Plummer. I think he's QB1. There has been nothing that I've seen at all that has suggested that there should be a quarterback change. I have never suggested that. I'm not going to suggest that. I think Louisville will be at its best with Jack Plummer playing at his highest level. I think Louisville has the best position or best chances to succeed with Plummer under center at Louisville. Granted, I think you look at how this offense struggled on Friday evening. They weren't able to run the ball. The offensive line wasn't able to create the gaps for the running backs, and I think that contributed to the passing game woes here and there because NC State was able to essentially bring pressure more often than not because they didn't have to worry about rushing or didn't have to worry about the Louisville rushing attack. That's fair to suggest. I think a lot of Louisville's issues were self-inflicted. Some penalties, some turnovers, some dropped passes, etc. I think that you give credit to NC State, but you also realize that this Louisville offense, I don't necessarily think that this is all that alarming. I mean, it's not ideal, but you're never going to play every game perfectly. I still think that this is one of the top 10 offenses in college football. Obviously, it's going to be put to the test this upcoming week against Notre Dame, so that's something to focus on. But right now, I don't think that, there's much room for panicking. I've seen some people on social media really, really nervous that Louisville isn't going to be all that good because the offense had one bad performance. I don't think one bad performance erases 4 good performances. You can keep bringing up the schedule and saying that, the schedule is what it is. So, Louisville will soon be shown that they are fraudulent. I don't believe that whatsoever. Will they go 12-0? Probably not, but I think that they're going to be competitive in every single game this season. So, wasn't the greatest offensive performance across the board for the Cardinals, but I do think that the offense is going to bounce back against Notre Dame. It's going to be no easy task, but I like where Louisville is sitting coming into a Saturday night game at home. It's going to be an electric atmosphere. I think the players are going to feed off of the crowd, and I think that this offense is going to have a bounce-back performance. So, no, do not worry about the offense moving forward because they definitely will bounce back. So, we are going to continue to talk about this game. We're going to talk about some individual stars of the contest on the next episode of the show with Grant Mulligan. I like the way that he breaks down the film, so I'm interested to see who he has picked as the individual stars of the game. And we will do that on the next episode of the show. But to conclude this show, we're going to kick off the week with a weekly mailbag. And it's now finally time to talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. It's the official sportsbook of Locked On. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, they have the best promotion. New customers can get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. I've done it. A good amount of my friends and family have done it. It is absolutely an exceptional bet. That's $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time. Do it right now. It's so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, single game parlays, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Okay, heading on into the final segment of the show, we are diving into a weekly mailbag, a couple of great questions. This one was from a YouTube comment on a couple episodes ago from Christian Fernandez. He asks, do you think our running back room or wide receiver room is our stronger room? That's a good question, Christian. Thank you for reaching out with that question. This really comes down to, you have two standouts, Jawar Jordan and Jamari Thrash, who are very good at their position. Maybe you give the edge to Jordan, but I think, honestly, it's almost like they cancel each other out. You then look at Maurice Turner / Isaac Guerrero to go along with Kevin Coleman Jr., Amari Huggins-Bruce, Chris Bell. It's tough, man. I'm going to go at this point, I think just due to the notion that they have so many standout or possible standouts, I'm going to go the wide receiver room, but barely just due to the numbers alone. I know that that's sort of a lazy cop-out, but I'm going with the wide receiver room because there are multiple players that kind of make up that nucleus. But Louisville running back room has three very solid running backs, so I kind of go back and forth here. So, the next question is about Jack Plummer. Listened to your show on Friday, agreed that there were multiple reasons why the offense was as rough as it was outside of Plummer, but I'm still not necessarily sold on him through 5 weeks in the season. Am I justified in thinking this way? I mean, you are obviously entitled to your opinion. I respect it. I think that Plummer hasn't been perfect all season. He's made some mistakes that have been pretty costly, but I mean, for the most part, I feel like he's been solid. I don't think he's been bad ever this year, like for a full game. Even in that game against Georgia Tech, I mean, he still had some solid moments. I mean, he's averaging, what is it about? I mean, he is averaging over 240 yards a game, and he obviously had to limit the amount of interceptions. He has 11 touchdowns to 6 interceptions, but he's looked better and better passing the ball downfield. I think he's going to continue to look better with the season continuing in its duration. I mean, I see why you may be concerned, but I don't think that Plummer has been as bad as people might suggest. I do think that we have yet to see the best of Jack Plummer at Louisville, so I'm pretty excited to see how he bounces back for the Notre Dame game when the lights are shining the brightest. But I don't necessarily think that he's been bad or anything like that. He's actually had a pretty solid start to the season. Continuing on along. This is okay. I completely lost my page that I had the questions on. Okay, here it is. This is a 4 games part of the schedule that you have talked about as being the key portion of the schedule to focus on, but the actual portion that I'm worried about is the last portion because there's 2 games that you definitely should win, and then you play Miami and Kentucky, 2 teams that you usually don't play well. What are your thoughts on that? Very, very valid point. I think the middle portion of the schedule is the toughest part of the schedule because of the 4 quality teams, because all 4 of them are winnable games, but all 4 of them you could definitely lose as well. You won the first one, but now you have 2 ranked teams in the next 3, Notre Dame, Duke, and then at Pittsburgh. So for me, the middle 4 still is the toughest point of the schedule because of the opportunity to lose. I think that Virginia and Virginia Tech are 2 of the worst teams in the conference. Now, it is worth saying that both at the moment, both Miami and Kentucky are ranked. They are going to be tough games to play. Miami is on the road. Kentucky is at home. Louisville has not played really well against either of those two since 2017. So, I mean, it is definitely worth saying that even though the second part of the schedule, in my opinion, is the key, you still can't overlook the back part of the schedule. So I understand that there. I just think that the middle part is where where most of the competition in that 4-week gauntlet that Louisville's going to have to go through. So that's just my opinion, but I respect yours as well. So hopefully you all had a great weekend celebrating the Louisville Cardinals' victory over the NC State Wolfpack. We're going to, like I said, talk about the individual stars in the next episode, but we will then turn to previewing the matchup against Notre Dame coming up. Highly anticipated matchup with the number 10 ranked Fighting Irish on Saturday evening. So everyone have a great start to your week. To find the episode on all streaming services, be sure to stay tuned to this graphic. The Locked On Louisville podcast is free and available wherever you get your podcast. So everyone have a great day. We'll see you